The title of my project is Manual versus Motion Capture Scoring of the Functional Movement Screen Trunk Stability Push-Up. Over 3,000 non-contact injuries occur every year in NCAA sports. The cause of these injuries is complex, as you can see from this multifactorial model of athletic injury etiology. We have a predisposed athlete with internal or intrinsic risk factors being exposed to external or extrinsic risk factors, which makes them susceptible to injury, and then an inciting event is all they need to become injured. So one important intrinsic risk factor is movement pattern quality. And what I mean by that is, for example, how well someone squats or lunges or does a push-up. So the functional movement screen was a series of 7 tests that it came out in 2006, and it's designed to grade and rank movement patterns that are key to normal human function. It's often used as a pre-participation screen to identify athletes who may be at risk for injury. As with any screen, it has strengths and limitations. The key strengths are that it's reliable and it has some predictive validity. So athletes who score below a certain threshold are more likely to become injured in the future. The key limitation is that it's difficult to observe as many criteria as the functional movement screen asks you to observe for each movement, including observing different joints from different angles. So one study showed that the FMS has questionable concurrent validity of the scoring system. So they looked at 6 of the 7 movements, and they compared the traditional manual scoring technique by one rater to an inertial-based motion capture scoring system. They established kinematic scoring criteria that they said were equivalent to the scoring guidelines given by the FMS manual, but they found poor to fair agreement between the scoring methods for all tests. It's possible, though, that their scoring criteria were inappropriate. For example, on the trunk stability push-up, they used an upper limit of 5 degrees of lumbar extension between adjacent segments of the spine. And they also only scored the first repetition of all of the movements, whereas the manual instructs you to score the best out of the 3 reps given. So the purpose of this study is to compare manual scoring of the functional movement screen trunk stability push-up to a novel motion capture scoring system. Based on the previous findings, I hypothesized that there would be poor to fair agreement between the scoring systems. 5 participants volunteered to be part of the study. You can see their demographics there. And flock of bird electromagnetic motion capture system was used with 2 sensors, one attached to the pelvis and one attached to the shoulder. So the manual scoring system given by the functional movement screen manual goes like this. Participants are given 3 repetitions of the trunk stability push-up in the first position, which is shown here, where their hands are aligned vertically with their forehead and at shoulder width. So this is the first position. The second position is their hands aligned at their chin instead of their forehead. So if their body raises as a unit with no lag in the spine, they get a 3 if their hands are at their forehead. If they do have lag in their spine, then they get a 2. Then you move to the chin, and if they perform it with no lag in the spine, they get a 2. And finally, if they're unable to perform either hand position without their shoulders rising before their hips, they get a 1. So I needed to just find some sort of kinematic criteria that would accomplish the same thing as the body rising as 1 unit. So I'm going to plot the position and the speed of the shoulder and the hip or pelvis markers over the push-up versus time. So here are the shoulder and pelvis positions. So as you can see, the left is the ascent of the push-up as the person goes from the ground up to the top of the push-up. Here now I'm plotting the speeds of the pelvis and the shoulder. So now here's the crux. I'm finding the largest difference in speed over that push-up. And I'm doing the same for all 3 push-ups from a trial, and then I'm taking the smallest one for scoring. So just to reiterate, the criteria for success on the manual scoring is that the participant's body lifts as a unit with no lag in the spine. For me, I'm using the minimum peak speed difference between the shoulder and the pelvis for 1 trial, and if that value falls below a certain threshold, I'll talk about the threshold in a second, then it's considered a successful push-up. So here are the results. You can see here, this is just for the visual, an example of a successful push-up where the minimum peak speed difference fell below the threshold. And here is an example of a push-up that was not a success, where the minimum peak speed difference exceeded that threshold 0.4 meters per second. So I had 5 participants, like I said, and I had 100% agreement between motion capture and manual scoring techniques. This is in contrast, obviously, to what was found previously. The results differ from the hypothesis and previous findings because Whiteside et al. From 2014 found just a 54.5% agreement between their 2 scoring techniques. Obviously, they had a different success threshold. Their threshold was based on the lumbar spine joint angle, and I used a velocity criterion. It's true that joint angles are more easily interpreted clinically, but it might be that they're too susceptible to subtle postural deviations during the push-up, whereas velocity might be more robust and preferable for scoring the push-up using motion capture. In addition, Whiteside used only the first push-up for scoring, whereas I used the best repetition, which aligns more with the manual scoring system. I should also note that I calculated an inter-rep, inter-class correlation between push-ups, and I found that I had a minimum detectable difference of 0.25 meters per second, and that falls below the threshold that I used, so I know that I was measuring a true difference with the 0.4 meters per second. The key limitation for this study was that there was no previously established minimum peak speed difference threshold, so I had to use the data from this study to derive one, and the way I did that was just that I averaged all of the minimum peak speed differences across participants in trials to come up with the 0.4. Although this is not the best way to find this value, it turns out that Whiteside and company in their discussion attempted to do the same thing, but they couldn't find a threshold that would improve their agreement any more than the one that they established. So more research is really needed to determine if the 0.4 meters per second threshold would apply for a larger number of participants. In conclusion, there were no differences in scores between the manual and motion capture scoring systems for 5 participants, and this is contrary to previous findings, but it's possible that manual scoring of the trunk stability push-up may exhibit concurrent validity with motion capture. Here are my references, and I'll take any questions. Thanks.